At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Greg, joined always by Joe.
Hello.
And you're listening to the Super NES podcast, episode number 224. Where this time we're covering not one but two games, because two games are very similar to one another. We decided it just made logical sense to lump together. We're looking at the Super NES ports of the King of the Monsters games, which were originally arcade games developed by SNK, which got ported to the Super NES and other systems during the early 90s. So, I have played these games like in the arcade. I don't remember where I saw them at. Neo Geo arcade machines were very common for a long time. It's like, a lot of, probably. Even though they were expensive, the fact that I think the reason that they were popular and the reason they stuck around so long was because that the arcade operators could easily mix and match the games into the system. There are other universal quote unquote plug and play arcade systems out there in the past. Data East tried that concept way back when in the early 80s with their Daco system. But that used they used the equivalent of 8-track tapes, so it was a very clunky, not very effective system. Neo Geo system, however, was very good for that because you very easily plug and play in the systems, and I think it had 6 games of it. The ability to have up to 6 games, if I remember correctly. So, as a result, you saw those machines all over the place. So I don't remember exactly where I played the King of the Monsters games at, but I did play them in the arcade. There are still some Neo Geo arcade machines around. I have seen them occasionally still even today in 2023. They're definitely harder to find. But the fact that those machines are even still around just goes to show how popular that they were, despite their initial high cost. And the Neo Geo games, as anybody who knows anything about consoles knows, were very high tech for their day. They definitely they were true 32-bit games. They looked they looked and sounded great. Neo Geo was very limited to the Neo Geo was very limited on the games that they released, which is one reason the system. Well, one of several reasons the whole version of the system did do very well because pretty much it was only good for fighting games, sports games. So, if you were a fan of if you're a fan of those genres, there were some great games there. So, but beyond that, to be fair, puzzle games.
And they did have the Metal Slug series, which is fantastic.
That's true. Yes. Also, yep. Metal Slug is still alive and well today. So, but the Magical Drop series also started on Neo Geo. Yes. Speaking like puzzle games, which is also still around today. But it was but really it was the insanely high cost of the Neo Geo home system that really that hurt sales the most. But anyway, that's a very long way of introducing the overall concept of the podcast, and just saying my experience with the games. I never played the home version of the games, so this was the first for me. What was your experience with the franchise and already home versions previously, Joe?
So like you, I experienced these in the arcade, and it was an amazing experience because you get to be kaijus and have awesome kaiju fights. That being said, the only real memory I have was playing King of the Monsters 2 for the Genesis, which, we'll get into, but it was, I remembered it being a much meatier game than what we got here on the SNES. I think there was a total 7 fighters altogether. It pretty much was almost a one-for-one port of the arcade game. I think it was only missing a couple bosses that you couldn't play as, but everything else was there. And yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for fighting games, but this is spoiler. This is very much a button masher, and it was the same way in the arcade. It was a button masher, so it's all how you spend your quarters.
Yep. So there actually are pretty big differences between like 1 and 2, which we'll get here to like in a moment. But the overall concept of the games is the same. It's pretty much the same as Joe just mentioned. I mean, really, these are kaiju games. Totally. It's like, SNK wanted to make a game featuring the popular monsters, the popular Japanese and American monsters too, like Godzilla, King Kong, Ultraman, etc. So you have like not Godzilla, not Ultraman, etc., like in the games. But for the most part, they are kaiju games, and the formula has proven to be very popular. I couldn't find any proof, but I definitely believe that the excellent, more recent game War of the Monsters directly took inspiration like in the series.
I agree.
And also some of the other newer Godzilla games as well too. They all take inspiration from like this game. Whereas this game itself also, I was also reminded like the old arcade games Rampage.
Yes.
This game as well too, because again, in turn, I think these games took inspiration from that game as well too. So. We have not talked about SNK on this podcast yet because we've not covered a Super NES SNK game. So I'll just talk about the company briefly. The history of SNK is complicated, so I'm not going to go into the whole story right here because it has been several podcasts and videos itself. Anybody who wants to deep dive the company, I highly recommend checking those out. But SNK. SNK basically stands for Shinjihan Kaiku Corporation, and they date back. The original company dates back to 1978. So they have made during the early days. They made a lot of arcade games. They also made a lot of games for home systems at the time. NES, Super NES, Genesis, Game Boy. Before they released their own Neo Geo arcade system, and then made like a home version like of that. But so the company's gone through at least one, if not more, bankruptcies, remergers, reacquisitions, that kind of stuff. They are still around. They're still around today. They're just not as prolific as a developer and a publisher like they used to be. A lot of their recent games have just simply been like ports, like older games. So. That's just a real quick summary of SNK. So, but they were but during the peak in the 80s and 90s, they were well respected like being like a very good arcade game manufacturer. Probably I'd say beyond King of the Monsters. I'd probably say they're most famous. The most famous like the Metal Slug and the Akari Warrior series.
Yeah.
As well as also Samurai Showdowns and the big one, Magical Drop. Trying to think about what series have done over the years. So
I mean, it's kind of faded in popularity, but Art of Fighting was a big one.
True. Yep. So King of the Monsters originally came out. Like the arcade in February of 1991, like a worldwide release. Ports very soon followed. The Neo Geo home system got the game first in July of that year. They got a worldwide release. The game finally got ported to Super NES about a year later in July of 1992 in Japan, and then came out in North America and Europe later on that year. The Genesis version of the game did not come out worldwide like 1993. So. Later on, the game was ported to several things. There was a PC version available for 2017. Both games were included like in the SNK Arcade Collection, Arcade Classic Volume 1 for I think that was during the PS2 days. Let me confirm that just real quick here. Where is it here? Oh, 2018. Okay, yeah. So, no, sorry. That was like that was 2000s. Yeah, probably like the PS2 and the like. The most recent version of the most recent port of the game, and the one that shows for sale, is that both Kingdom Monsters 1 and 2 is available on the Switch. By a company, it was released by a company called Hamster as part of their arcade archives line. So, like, if you want to play the game nowadays, that's probably the best version to look at, because that port also features 2 extra features of the game, such as like a high score mode and a caravan mode. So, probably that version of the game is the best way to go. They made in some stage, there's probably a prototype version. The prototype version is still floating around. Enhanced version of Kingdom Monsters for the Neo Geo CD, which was advertised even, but it never came out. So I was probably pretty close to being done, if not finished. I guess SNK decided the sales wouldn't warrant really wouldn't actually releasing the game.
Yeah.
And if anybody, I'm too old to watch the show. But if anybody grew up watching Nickelodeon game show Nick Arcade.
Oh yeah.
Kingdom Monsters was a very popular game on that show as well.
Yep.
So, always getting picked, it seemed like. So whether or not that was because of the developers kind of nudging people toward the game, or just kids loving fighting / kaiju games, who knows? But anyway, so the first game is primarily it is kind of it is a fighting game, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this, Joe, because you have more experience with the genre than I do. I was finding it more of a wrestling game playing this one, to be honest, because it's very slow, it's deliberate. Your guys, your monsters do a lot of damage. The throws moves like it might be like a wrestling games. That's kind of the impression I had.
Yeah, I mean, they're you have your punch and kick button, you have a jump button, and you have your run button, and then I couldn't figure out how I was enabling grappling moves, but at some point you get into a grapple, you can mash the punch and kick buttons, and depending on what buttons you're pushing, you either do some sort of grapple move, which ends up being a suplex, or I played as Ultraman, by the way. There's also the, they whip them off the quote-unquote ropes because there's an electrical field, and they'll come back. So, I mean, I agree. This could be classified as a wrestling game. I still see it as a fighting game, but I agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a fighting game. It's just like it feels more like a wrestling game, and kind of like its core with your core with like how SNK decided to have the game play.
Yeah.
So, and again, as I mentioned before, the gameplay is a bit different than the sequel, like compared to this one. That's why that's why I didn't want to say the wrestling part of it early.
Yeah.
So, the game does give you on the main menu the controls. If you just sit there for a minute, the game will show you how to do all the moves that curl out, which is a nice touch. So, some of the other options the game includes, it has it obviously has the player one versus the computer, where you go through the usual pick a monster, fight all the other monsters, do a boss to the end, game over kind of thing. But there's also 2-player option, and there's also there's also an option screen where you can also customize the controls and that kind of stuff. So. Obviously, the home ports are going to suffer in quality, because this was I think this was like a 74 megabit game, like Neo Geo Arcade. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, if you're going to port that game down to 16-bit cartridge, compromises have to be made. So, going into the game, I expected the compromise would be very badly, because I have seen other and have played briefly other SNK ports like Samurai Showdown, which is not very good. But getting to this, I was actually surprised. The game, limitations aside, is a pretty good port, like its arcade origins, I thought. I mean, obviously the graphics take a hit, the music takes a hit. So the 12 levels of the arcade game had to cut down to 8. The 6 monsters the arcade game featured cut down to 4. other like compromises, like that as well too. But the moves are all here. The gameplay plays very similar like the arcade game, I thought. You still have the rich detailed background, like about the actual historical Japanese landmarks and buildings that the original arcade game featured. Yeah, all in all, I was surprised by actually how good of a port that this game was. Your limitations aside. So, what did you think about the conversion, Joe?
So, all right, I thought overall it wasn't bad. I understand there were going to be compromises and everything else. I think the biggest issue for me was that it's a button masher. That's for one. That's the only way I could do anything was button mashing. I couldn't figure out how to do any of the super moves. I had my opponents throw lasers at me, but I couldn't figure out how to do it for the life of me. It was nice that every time I, delivered a suplex or a pile driver, a P would pop up and it would go towards my power gauge. Never figured out how to use it, but it's there. Biggest issue for me was, so it has a 5-minute time limit for the matches.
Right.
Every single fight took me almost the entire 5 minutes. It didn't matter if I was beating the monster down to if it was Mortal Kombat, I would have had a perfect game. When you go to pin them, it's never going to be a clean 1, 2, 3 on the first try or the second try the third try.
But to be fair, I think a lot of fighting games have the same issue. I think.
Yeah. So I mean, it is what it is. The other thing is, you do get your 4 monsters. You get Gion, who is a Godzilla ripoff. Rocky, who's a rock-like monster. Astro Man, who's obviously Ultraman, and then you have Beatlemania, which I put in parentheses, get it, who's obviously a beetle monster. The port leaves out Wu, who is the King Kong ripoff, and Poison Ghost. Locations, you have Okayama, Osaka, Kyoto, and Tokyo. That's it. And this game suffers from what I call ghost and goblin syndrome, where you have to basically go through all 4 locations and all 4 monsters twice to get the true ending. Which is fine, except for it makes this game very repetitive, especially when you don't know the moves, and like I said, it's a button masher. So, needless to say, carpal tunnel was definitely a issue with this game. As we spoke about, I think the visuals are okay, especially for a 16-bit conversion. I thought the sprites were a decent size. There's enough detail to see, the different, characters and how they're distinct. The cities are done well enough. I never figured out completely what was up with the destruction and contamination percentages at the end of the fight. I know, obviously it's based on destruction and everything else. But I couldn't figure out how that factored into your score or anything
Basically,
like that.
It's again, that's a mechanic that they took from Rampage. The more direction, the more direction you do, the more points you score.
Yeah, so of course I'm thinking the opposite. So my first match, I barely touched the city. I think I destroyed the bridge that was in front of me to start, obviously, because that's what separates you and the monster. And then I think we might have lightly got onto land. So the first time, my destruction was 2%, my contamination was 1%. Whereas, my second match, I made sure I purposely walked all throughout the city and everything else and destroyed everything and noticed the bonus points went up. So it is what it is. But, I think, for what they could do on the Super Nintendo at the time, I think this is a pretty good port.
Yeah, I agree, and like I definitely agree with you. So I definitely agree with you. Like limitations and problems that this game has. I mean, like the controls do take a while to get the hang of. I thought the game. The graphics, what I thought were good for an early Super NES game because this is an early Super NES game, so 1992.
Yeah.
So the graphics I thought were pretty good, all things considered. I thought the game looked a bit dark, but I thought the colors were kind of washed out like a little bit. Like for a moment, I thought. I don't mean for this to be an insult or anything. For a moment, I thought it was for a moment I thought I'd messed up and loaded the Genesis version of the game instead because the game looked Genesis games do look kind of dark. So, but no, the game just kind of like not very bright, basically.
Yep.
The music I thought the music again carried over like arcade version, the arcade game. It's good for what it is. I mean, it's basically like you're basically like like fighting music. So there really isn't a plot in this game per se. Just kind of like monsters invaded Japan, have at it kind of like thing. So yeah, I mean, like there. As far as fighting games, the system, as far as fighting games and the system goes, I think this is not the best, but not the worst either. Like we've talked about it before in the past, Joe, but I think this would have been perfect for like a weekend rental.
Yeah.
Especially if you have like a friend over to play with you, because obviously two players like where the game shines. So but yeah, for like because it's kind of shallow. The videos of this game on YouTube are pretty short, about a half an hour to go through the whole game. So it's not very long. You know what you're doing. So, but then again, like shallow, difficult to play, whatever. A lot of, like I said before, a lot of the same complaints you could level with other fighting games as well too. So
right.
It's not just it's not just like unique to this. I think that. All in all, this game was probably ported to the system about as well as SNK could have handled, all things considered. But did you check out the Genesis port of the game as well too, Joe?
I did not.
The Genesis version of the game is much worse.
Well, I mean, I believe it. Especially at that time, much like the Super Nintendo. I mean, very early Genesis games are quite ugly, and sound-wise, they're not great either. So, I completely could see this port on the Genesis being pretty bad.
Well, it's like, just to give you an example for comparison's sake. This game, when it came out, got mixed reviews. Not compared to the arcade game, of course. Of course, the arcade game was very, very popular.
Right.
Like when the game came out, so Replay, which is a magazine they used to cover the arcade industry, said that 1991 this was the third most popular game in the world. The Super NES version of the game got mixed reviews. Game players, for example, gave out a 10. The 10 Power gave like 3.2 out of 5. IGN did not cover the game until 2008 in a retrospective, but they gave it 5.5 out of 10. Mm-hmm. So they basically, the reviewer basically said, quote, "There's some appeal to the sight of giant creatures kicking over skyscrapers and stadiums on their way to fighting one another, like to a pulp, but the game just ends up being far too shallow," which is pretty much the same things that we've already said. Yeah. But Mega, the popular Genesis magazine of the time, gave the Genesis version of the game, however, a whopping 10%.
Yeah.
So it's like, ouch.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Neo Geo home version was the way to play the game because that console was basically the arcade system. That's why it was so expensive because the console had the guts like an arcade machine inside of it. So, but then of course, like I said before, there's a very good port of the game on Switch these days, which has some enhancements. So, if you want to play the game these days, that's definitely the version to get. I didn't look to see what the arcade archives is currently going for a price, but it's probably like fairly cheap. and Switch, indie game, indie slash older third-party games often go on sale on the Switch.
Yeah.
But Nintendo never puts their own stuff on sale. But third-party stuff, they have no problem with that.
Yeah.
So go figure. But anyway, So all in all, better than I expected. I mean, my bar was like pretty low to begin with on this,
Right.
so I think I think that helped. But compared to Samurai Showdown, a much better conversion of a very sophisticated arcade game onto the lowly quote unquote 16-bit Super NES. So worth playing today, maybe if you have a friend, especially if you have a friend to play it against. I think the game still holds out, but I guess if you're a fan of fighting games, and especially kaiju in particular, this has some appeal to it still even today. But it's not like a go-to game. So I'll ask you about your thoughts about that, Joe, in the end after we cover the sequel here. So which obviously because of how popular the game was, of course, it was going to be a sequel.
Yeah.
Anything? But was there anything else you want to say about King of the Monsters before we moved on to the sequel?
Nope, we can move on to the sequel.
All right, so the sequel came out fairly rapidly because, obviously, same engine, that kind of stuff, blah blah blah. The game came out to the sequel's full name is King of the Monsters 2. The next thing. So to take the actual Japanese name, though it's often just called King of the Monsters 2, especially especially for its worldwide release. Mm-hmm. The game came out in the arcades May of 1992. Came out in the Neo Geo system about a year later for Japan, North America only. Super NES version of the game came out December 93 for Japan, June 1994 for North America. Again, no Europe releases like this game this time. Genesis version came out only in North America, 1994, and this time this game did come out to Neo Geo CD, coming out in Japan in September 1994, and not in North America finally getting the game in October of '96. But the Neo Geo Home system was supported for a long time. I think I don't remember exactly when the last game of the system came out, but it came, but it doesn't get supported for a long time. So I think let me look real quick here to see about. Well, anyway, so I'll look for it later. But yeah, I think around 2009. Was the last game to the system. So because because got games for a long time.
2010. So. Oh, sorry,
2010,
no.
Yeah.
Treasure of the Caribbean was made in 1994 and released in 2011 for the Neo Geo CD. So there you go. That's the last one.
Yeah. So it got supported for a long time. So, but anyway, yeah. So this one actually they actually give a plot to it. They're actually just an open story for you, the open this game. 3 years after the events of the first game, only 3 monsters survived the original game. But then in 1999, a powerful alien monster and a wave of minions threatens to conquer the Earth. Surviving monsters use defend Earth again. Shades of Godzilla here. So, this game, however, I thought was definitely more of a beat 'em up game. I thought because things just moved faster. The game felt more like an actual true Final Fight style game compared to a wrestling game that the first game was. So that's the main impression I got of the gameplay, and I prefer that style of gameplay a bit better. So I actually had more fun with this game. Gameplay wise, it is very similar to the first game. You do have some additional options. There's nice as well as the one player versus computer and one player versus 2 player. There's also very nice co-op game mode. Great game mode where both of you can play against the computer, which is kind of a nice touch. This game also supports difficulty levels as well too. The 3 different levels. So. So the monsters are a bit larger. They're definitely not a bit. They're definitely larger. They're actually quite a bit larger in this game. Maybe like about a third bigger, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
So
that sounds about right.
as you expect for a sequel, the graphics are like more advanced. They're a bit more lush, a bit more detailed. This game is much brighter than the first game is. It's like, okay, this is a Super NES game now this time. So, the interface is a bit larger and easier to see. There is a very nice. I'm not sure how to describe it, Joe. There's a very nice input guide that shows you shows you when you're doing like certain moves.
Yep.
On the controller, which helps. For sure. So. And again, this version of the game sacrifices a bit, but it get like shrunk down like how they shrunk down like the Super NES. The characters are actually smaller here than they are like an arcade game. Some of the characters are missing some of the characters like are missing, of course. Yeah. There's 7 levels altogether, like in the stage. You only have 3 monsters to pick from, as mentioned. He was mentioned like in the story. The variety is a little bit more different, at least, because like in the first game we were only fighting in Japan. Like in this game, you are fighting worldwide, at least. So at least the backgrounds do kind of change a little bit. After the first 6 stages, there's a final stage. The final stage, like a boss rush. Yep. A boss rush where you have to defeat him within a time limit. That influences if you get like a bad ending versus like a good ending. Yep. There's also 2 bonus stages, as well as a ranking, depending upon how many points that you got. So, but anyway, So they're pretty much typical enhancements, improvements that you expect to see of a sequel. Like for a game of this type. So, what do you think about this game, overall, Joe, and how do you like it compared to the first game?
So, for me, the sequel is a leap forward, but also a bit of a step back at the same time. I thought it was a step back because you only have the 3 monsters to choose from. Super Gion, which is your Godzilla-like creature, who looks more dragon-like now in reality than he did in the first game. Cyber Wu, who is your King Kong, and then you have Atomic Guy, who is formerly Astro Guy from the first game.
Right.
I still couldn't figure out how to do anything other than basic punches and kicks and grapples. I did accidentally find out that you can rip off the top of a skyscraper and hit someone with it, so that's a plus. Other than that, music and graphics are, in my opinion, vastly improved. The sprite models are definitely more detailed. You can really see the city is kind of a bit more alive this time around than they were the first time. The 7 levels are all, different and interesting. You start with the American city. That's all it says is the American city. Then you move to a French city. Then for some reason they specifically say the Grand Canyon because, that's different than an American city. Then you have the desert, the seabed, lava zone, and then the final is the hideout where you get that boss rush. I thought the boss rush was kind of a cheap way to kind of end the game, but I get it. Like, especially at this time, this was a very popular thing to do, especially in arcades, but definitely in the home ports as well. So, I mean, overall, it's definitely, a few notches better than the first one, but I still would sit there and recommend, actually in this case, I would recommend the Genesis version over the SNES version.
Genesis version of the game is very, very different.
Yeah, so, and it has a whole slew of playable characters, so I think you're not as limited.
Right, so I think that SNK. Well, first of all, SNK didn't handle the ports of the game this time around.
Okay.
Their subsidiary Takara handled the Super NES Genesis ports of the original game. For the sequel, the ports were given different companies. The Super NES version of the game was ported by a company called Now Productions, which you probably Now Production. You probably haven't heard Now Production, but they've been around for a very long time. 1986. They've handled a lot of ports for various systems like over the years. Most recently, they handled porting some older Pac-Man games onto the Switch.
Oh, okay.
So they're they haven't developed too much on their own, but very much on their own because they mostly do of course mobile and pachinko games, but they have a pretty good track record as a developer. So they were tasked by SNK to handle the port. The Genesis version of the game was given to a company called B-Top, and I think probably recognizing how poorly Genesis version of the original game was received, that they were like, we can't do that again because because nobody will buy it. Let's make a game more cater to Genesis strengths and make a game inspired by like straight port. So as a result, you have Genesis. More of a traditional one-on-one fighting game, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
You can talk about that version of the game more if you want to, Joe.
So I actually did end up playing that version of the game.
Oh, okay. Well, I do have. Well, it's not bad. It's so like I said, it's definitely it's definitely more inspired by instead of being like a straight port like an arcade game.
Yeah.
You have more characters available to you because you can play as the various boss monsters. All characters except for one are playable. All the monsters have special. All the monsters have special attacks. You have to destroy other monsters one after the other. There's no scoring stages that the Neo Geo version, the Neo Geo Super version of the games have, and the final boss is to clone yourself. There's also three additional cities like the game as well too. So I still prefer the original arcade versus Super NES version of the game. However, I think I think B-Top did an excellent job with realizing that they needed to change the game to Genesis for it to do well. And I thought, all things considered, it's a very good game of its own rights. I really wouldn't call it a Kingdom Monsters 2 game, more like inspired by game. But as it is, it's a very good game. It's a very good game in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I loved playing the Super Nintendo version, so I mean, yeah, it's limited, in what you can do compared to what I saw you can do with the Genesis one, but part of me wanted to play the Genesis one, but then I was like, are we actually going to really talk about the difference and get into the nitty gritty of it? But probably not. So I was just like, passing a watch on a quick YouTube video, and that was, essentially my experience. But like I said, I remember having the game at some point for the Genesis, but I'm old now. My memory is not that great. So there's certain things I can remember, and then there's others that they're lost to time. So,
well, it's very uncommon. No, I understand that. I wanted to mention it because it's very uncommon for one system or another to get a very different version of the game. Because most of the time, there's the straight ports. So I want to. If there are significant differences, I did want to mention that, and overall, overall appears to be a pretty smart move because the Genesis version of the game this time viewed just as well as the Super NES version of the game did. So that's not say the home ports were loved. This game had mixed reviews.
Yeah.
For example, All Game gave Super NES version of the game 3.5 out of 5 stars. AGM gave 29 out of 40. GameFan gave 240 out of 300. GamePro gave it 11.5 out of 20, etc., etc. Again, middling scores. But more importantly, Genesis version of the game ranked just as well as Super NES version of the game this time around. So definitely probably a smart decision in their part. So here's actually a case study where we differ, Joe. I prefer the sequel. I think that the faster beat 'em up nature of the game just appeals to me more compared to the first game.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. The combos are still hard to pull off. The fighting game mechanics do take something used to. There's still like the game's still kind of a shell game. But then of course, if you're playing this game, you know what you're doing with this. But so it's like, again, a good weekend rental. I think I think this more in depth to have with this game than the first game does for sure. But which may sound like damning praise, but it's really not though, because I said I did like the first game. I just thought this game was better. So
Yeah.
The boss rush at the end, like you said, a lot of games do it at a time.
Yeah.
I did love, however, the design of the final boss, like very gross looking. So
Yeah.
like very well done, on the developer's part. As far as making that,
and I mean, to be fair, like I did like the setup where you start off by fighting the monster, you get him down to a certain amount of health, and then it becomes a side-scrolling beat 'em up for a bit. Oh, I was confused at first because I was like, his life bar wasn't gone, but he was gone, and then things started coming out at me. So like it took me a little while to figure out what was going on, but once I cleared those enemies and figured out that, oh wait, you can still walk to the right and there's the monster again, and you just got to beat him up again. It's nice to kind of break that up. I feel like it was padding for the game to make it worth the probably $60 this came out as when it was released, but at the same time, it was a nice change. It's not just you're mashing the button more than you normally would because it's a beat 'em up now, but it feels like you're actually doing something and getting somewhere. Whereas like with the first game, I felt like I was just mashing buttons to mash buttons until his life was completely gone. And then, even then I knew, like, I'm pinning him to just pin him because I know he's going to get up. And I'm going to have to beat him up again and get him down and then try to pin him again. And I'm going to have to do that a few times before I can keep him down. Where in this game, you beat him down, you go to the beat him up section, then he comes back, you beat him down again, and then generally, if you have knocked out his health, no issues, you pin him, it's done. So,
yeah, definitely. So, so I think, so like if you're a fan of kaiju games, I think these games still hold up well enough. Hold well enough today to play. Like I said, there are better fighting games in the system, but what they are, like I think they're pretty good. And like I said before, very impressed by how well these very powerful arcade games were condensed down like the Super NES, because it's like, because it said other SNK arcade games like I mentioned before did not get converted as well. So developers at least knew like what they were doing. So and again, like most fighting games, 2-player mode, that's where the game shines.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Because it's obviously more fun to fight against other human. Surprisingly enough, there are no codes for the first game. Well, correction, there are no codes. The Super NES version of the game. Other versions of the game have codes, but for some reason, the Super NES version of the game does it. They took those out. The sequel, however, does have like a few codes. There's a debug screen that you can access. We can do like various things with. And you can also get, and there's also code to get extra continues. Keep in mind, however, both these codes require to have a second controller. So if you're playing in emulation, you can just like finagle that with the keyboard, like or whatever. So eBay pricing, not bad pricing on this game. I think probably the fact that it's not super popular these days is probably why pricing is pretty affordable. The original game is a bit more expensive than the. Actually, Actually depends. Curiously enough, the original game is a little bit more expensive in cart version, but the sequel is more expensive in CIB version. So one of those like weird oddities that kind of works out. Both games are relatively common on eBay. For the first game, 24 copies of the game are currently listed on eBay at the time of doing research. 34 copies of the game recently sold. For the sequel, 31 copies of the game are listed. 22 copies recently sold. These prices all include shipping. For the first game, card only, the sold prices ranging from $15 to $22. So average Super NES pricing, I think, for that game. For the sequel, more of a variance. Some copies sold as cheap as $9. Other copies sold for expensive at $27. So more of a window variance for the sequel. So as far as the current pricing goes. For CIB, however, it's more cheaper. It's more cheaper for the first game. Maybe because the sequel sold better. I'm not really sure, but CIB pricing the first game ranging from $57 to $70, whereas CIB copies of the sequel sold anywhere from $72 to $164. So, for not bad Super NES pricing.
I was thinking maybe for a loose card, I was thinking maybe $30, $40 for both of these. So that's not too shabby. It's not too far south of that number.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I don't know. Pretty good fighting games. Like I said before, pleasantly surprised by how these games were ported over. There are some conversions. There's some conversions you definitely can argue they shouldn't have bothered. I think that what was that last Street Fighter game that came out very late in Super NES's life? Lifespan we covered before the Street Fighter episode.
Super Street Fighter.
Whatever that last one is, the last one is the 96 port.
Street Fighter Alpha 2. They made so many compromises and it cuts on that version of the game. They feel they shouldn't have even have tried, but not the case of these two games. If you didn't know any better, if you didn't know about the arcade originals, you think that you could totally think these new games be happy with them, especially back in the day. So, Joe and I may differ slightly as to which game we think is better. That's more of a matter of personal taste, I think, because I said the two games do vary in gameplay a bit. But they're both respectable games. If you're a fan of kaiju games in particular, this is fun to play. But not the best, but not the worst for the system either. Definitely by far. So. Any final thoughts or anything else you want to add onto the games, Joe? No, I agree with all that you've said, and if video game rental was still a thing, these would still be a weekend rental for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, I think even $30 is kind of steep for a cart. So I would obviously say emulation, or get it for the Switch, because then you're playing the true arcade versions, and usually those arcade archives aren't any more than $6.99 or $5.99. So and they go on sale a lot. So you can usually get them even cheaper. So modern wise, definitely play the arcade archive versions and just play the arcade versions. But if you got a Super NES collection, and honestly, $30 for a Super Nintendo game isn't bad. These wouldn't be horrible to pick up.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the King of the Monsters games for you. Next up in the podcast, we're covering our last new game. Covering our last new game in 2023. The very last game Joe and I picked from our original list made months ago. At this point. I'm a fan of bowling. I enjoy bowling. I enjoy bowling quite a lot. So I wanted to take a look at Super Bowling on the system, which I remember playing back in the day. I think it was pretty good bowling games. I'm curious to see how it holds up today. So,
yeah, I'm interested to be playing this game because as far as bowling is concerned, I think 10-pin alley on this PlayStation was probably the home version bowling that I remember most fondly. And then in the arcade, I remember Capcom bowling with the trackball.
I remember that.
That was in every bowling alley. So, and my parents used to bowl on bowling league, so I had a lot of time to play that arcade game. So, those are my two loves as far as bowling virtually in a video game form goes. So, I'm excited to check this out and see how it is.
Yeah, definitely. So, as always, thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, please feel free to join our Facebook group. You can also send me an email directly at thesnepodcast@yahoo.com. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on Google, Facebook, X, all those places. Joe Sucks 30 on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. You can also find my podcast, The Radical Retro Roundup, not family friendly. Keep that in mind. Do not play it without headphones if you're at work. That's the best way I can explain it. I try to keep things toned down, but also there's no filter. So, and we do get a bit ranty in that show. So if you are keen to staying on topic and wanting, to be kind of like what Greg and I do, where we stay on topic and talk strictly the game that we're talking about. You might not like the Radical Retro Roundup, but hey, we get a bit ranty, and I can get a little squirrely on that show. So it's just us unfiltered, and it's fun. So there's that. Yeah, you can find me. Google is a thing.
Right. Yep. Yeah, for sure. So, but yeah. Okay, well, as always, thank you very much for giving us a few minutes of your day. Stay safe, everyone. Be well, and we'll catch you again next time. Later, all.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Deep power.